Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the second part of your Standard 3 screencast lecture. When we left off, I was talking about a few acts that the British had enacted upon the American colonists in order to try to pay for the French and Indian War. And I had told you guys that you're welcome to kind of poke through, and you should poke through each of these acts that are on the screen and on this slide as well, because you're going to need them on your tests and quizzes. But I want to illustrate one particular act in particular, and that's the Townshend Act. The reason that this is most important is because after the Boston Massacre, that we'll talk about here in just one second, in order to try to calm the Americans down, what you're going to see is the British repeal most of these taxes with the exception of these Townshend Acts. It's kind of a way of the British Parliament trying to show the American colonists that, we're still in charge, even though we're willing to give a little bit, we still run the show. So kind of more on that later. So these acts altogether, they obviously serve to anger the American colonists, and they lead to groups like the Sons and Daughters of Liberty that are designed to protest British rule or kind of create pamphlets and journals and things that can be used to spread the news all over the American colonies of how bad the British are. And then the committees of correspondence are basically designed to inform the American colonists of exactly how bad the British are. So when you kind of move forward through history, tensions in the American colonies are growing. The British are taxing the American colonists. They're not allowing the American colonists to be represented in Parliament. So the colonists kind of feel like they're the victims of this situation. These tensions will continue to grow until you get the Boston Massacre, dun, dun, dun. March 5th, 1770, it's a date that you don't need to memorize, but you do need to know the sequential order of how these events go. It's not important that you know the exact date. You can Google that on your phone at any time of the day or night. But what is important is that you know how the pieces of these puzzles fit together so that you can understand how we get to the American Revolution. So, the British, after they tax the American colonists, they store all of these taxes at customs houses stationed all throughout the American colonies until they're ready to be shipped back to Great Britain. So, in kind of protest of these latest rounds of taxes, the American colonists decide they're going to go kind of harass the British guards at one of these customs houses in Boston. If those of you that have ever been to Boston in the winter, you know it's not exactly a pleasant place. You're not going to go there in shorts and a t-shirt to go to the coast. It doesn't work. It's cold, snowy, there's ice all over the place. So the American colonists, they allegedly might have grabbed some of that snow and ice and started throwing it at the British. The British soldiers feel threatened. Allegedly, they then fire into the crowd. Ultimately, there's conflicting reports about who fires first and who are the aggressors. But at the end of the day, 5 American colonists are going to be dead, including Crispus Attucks, who's kind of unique because he is the first casualty of the American Revolution. That is the first one to die in Boston Massacre, and he's also African American. So you can examine the irony of an African American being the first one to die for the American cause, even though the American colonies currently permitted slavery. So, taste of historical irony for you. But like I said, Great Britain does not want to fight another full-out war. They didn't want to fight the Native Americans in a war with the Proclamation of 1763, and they don't want to fight another war now against their own American colonists in a internal uprising. So, they repeal most of these taxes, with the exception of the Townshend Acts, in order to try to kind of calm everything down. Now, what I've done is on the right side of the screen, I've linked a clip from the HBO show. It's called John Adams. This is the trial of those British officers who are responsible for the deaths and the soldiers as well, who are responsible for the deaths of the American colonists in Boston. And I've also linked a different clip up here. This is actually America, the Story of Us. And like I say here, please begin watching this at 1710 because that's where kind of the Boston Massacre part really kicks off. So if you want a little bit more on the Boston Massacre, take a look at it. Those are 2 pretty good clips that you can grab some content out of. Okay? So again, you can see rising tension inside the American colonies. Boston's ready to go up like a matchbox. But then you get a little bit of a calming period after the Americans aren't paying so much in taxes. The Townshend Acts are still around. That's still kind of a thorn in the American colonist side. So eventually those tensions are going to build and build until you get the Boston Tea Party. Now, most of y'all probably know exactly what the Boston Tea Party is already. If you don't, look at the name. You want to make a cup of tea, you drop the tea bag into the water, you dunk it around a little bit, and you have drinkable tea. The Boston Tea Party, they're basically turning Boston Harbor into a big tea kettle. They're dropping a whole lot of British tea into Boston Harbor and they're destroying it. Now, the British, in response to this, are obviously none too pleased. They feel like they've already bent over backwards to keep the American colonists happy. They've repealed a whole lot of taxes and they're about done with it. So, the British pass a series of acts. They're called the Coercive Acts, and these are designed to punish the American colonies, particularly Bostonians. They think that if they can teach Boston a lesson, that lesson will kind of percolate through the rest of the American colonies, and they won't have to fight a full-scale war in the Americas in order to hold on to their possessions. So again, the 4 acts, they're here for you. You guys can read what they do. It's pretty straightforward stuff. They shut down Boston Harbor. They refuse to allow local elections of officials any longer. Basically, the officials are now appointed by the Crown. Trials of British soldiers are now held in Great Britain, which kind of removes the local oversight from the British soldiers. And then you have the Quartering Act, which basically says that British soldiers can be housed in private homes, colonial homes, even against the will of the people that own the homes. So if a British officer knocked on your door and said, "My soldiers are now staying here," you either say yes or they throw you out of your house. Obviously, this continues to build tension inside the colonies. Okay? So all of this anger exists in the American colonies, but it's not really organized. Nobody has really, I guess, created something that everyone can rally behind. The Sons and Daughters of Liberty, yeah, they're a protest group, but they're mostly centered up in New England and in the North. And if you live in South Carolina or Georgia, you're much more concerned with the price of your harvest than you are with these kind of rebellious ideas. So Thomas Paine will now come along and enter the scene. He's going to write a pamphlet. It's kind of just like a very small book, if you want to think of it that way. And in this book, Common Sense, try to stay with me here, this is a big concept. He declares that it's common sense that the United States, or what will become the United States, should declare independence from Great Britain. So in Common Sense, Thomas Paine declares it is only common sense that we should break away from Great Britain because they are no longer serving our interests as American colonists. What makes his pamphlet different is that he writes it in such simple language that everyone can understand it. It's not written in kind of highfalutin Enlightenment terms that nobody knows what they mean. It's written like kind of the Bernstein Bears or Sesame Street version of why we should declare independence from Great Britain. Everyone reads it. It kind of creates that central common theme and kind of common material that everyone can talk about because a bunch of people have read it. Or if you are illiterate, you've probably had it read to you. Okay, so this is the second lecture. The driving point behind this one, again, was the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party. You guys can obviously pause these, rewind them, do what you need to do with them in order to get the content that you need. Don't forget about the associated quiz questions that go along with them. This is the big content drive for Standard 3. So review them, rewind them, do what you need to do. Thank you very much.